Hi, welcome back for another episode of Let's Talk About It. I'm joined by Paul Mander. He is the general manager of Optery, leading the B2B front, and we're talking about online data broker websites. Because, oh boy, does this pose a real business risk to you, even though it largely involves employee personal identifiable information like their email addresses, their home addresses, their cell phone numbers, etc. But bad actors are using this information from online data broker sites to fuel their campaigns against you for social engineering attacks, phishing attacks, things of the like. So you're going to want to be aware of this risk and what it entails and how you can solve it. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. Welcome to the show, Paul. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Amy.
Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about where you work and what you do?
Yeah, so I lead all of B2B at a company called Optery. What we do here at Optery is we're a personal data removal service. So we, at scale, will be able to find and remove people's data from data broker websites. And we'll get into what data broker websites are very shortly. But we have both a consumer business where individuals can sign up for Optery protection to protect themselves against things like identity theft and harassment. And then we also have a B2B business, which, as I said, I lead, where we help protect companies' employees for various reasons.
Okay, yes, because the online data broker thing is something that I've just woken up to. Maybe other security professionals are aware, but I'm aware, but the mass and scale of it, I think, is the shocking part for me.
Yeah.
So, can you tell us, let's start from the beginning, what is an online data broker? What kind of information are they collecting, and how are they getting that? It's a big question.
Yeah, yeah, it's a pretty scary world when you get into it, what data brokers do. But data brokers are really companies that will collect, aggregate, and then sell people's personal data. And what we mean by personal data here, these are your basic personal information like your name, your address, your phone number, your email address. There have demographic data, things your income level, things about property that you own. This could be personal data such as your political affiliations. These could even be data about your health. All these different types of data points that they package up and sell. And the data is there's legitimate use cases for data brokers, right? People use them. Recruiters use them to find candidates. B2B SaaS companies use them to find people to sell B2B SaaS to. But the dark side of it is that they're also a really good place for threat actors to go to get data that they need to begin social engineering attacks, but yeah, and which we'll get into shortly, right? But how these data brokers get this data, they use a variety of different ways. There's direct collection. So basically, what that means is there's some website that might have some sort of form on there that might be being run by the data broker, and you enter your name, your address for something. Maybe you're signing up for a newsletter or for some product or service, and they get the data from there. They partner with apps that you might use, and hidden in those terms and conditions is that, hey, we sell your data. And then there's maybe the more indirect ways, which I think perhaps frustrate people who are knowledgeable about it a bit more. They will combine data sets from different places. So I'll take the example. Let's take this person who maybe lives in a very rural area, and let's just say they've never even been on the internet, but they perhaps applied for a phishing license, and that's a government record. It's like public domain, not necessarily there on Google for you to be able to go look up, all right, this is this person who has a phishing license and that has his address and so on and so forth. But what a data broker will do is they'll make the necessary requests to get that information, and then they'll digitize it and put it out on the internet so that you can get it just through a quick internet search, and then also combine that with other data sources they might have to create an even more full profile of that person beyond what was just on that phishing license. So it's pretty crazy what they're able to do, and obviously they make a lot of money from selling personal data.
Right. Now, how extensive is this? Like, for me, I'm chronically online, unfortunately. How many data points would a single broker have on me, approximately?
Yeah, and let's poke on that chronically online thing, right? So I think there's a misconception out there about like, oh, I did something wrong, or I'm too loose with my privacy. As I said, that person who's never been on the internet, the data brokers have their data. So I don't think so. You should do all those right things about your social media posts and your security settings and all that. But it's not necessarily your fault that your data is out there. But getting to your question, uh, you know, from what we see here at Optery, the average person, in the U.S. specifically, right? We'll find their profile usually on at least 100 or so different data broker websites, and there's thousands and thousands of data broker websites out there. They all specialize in different points of data. So most people, unless you use a service such as ours, you can expect to find your data on probably hundreds of websites for the average US based person.
Right. But how deep are these records going?
Yeah, so we have data brokers that their profiles will have, okay, here's your name and here's the name of people that have lived with you. So if you look that up, these would be, your parents because we all lived with our parents, right, when we were kids at some point. Your siblings, if you had siblings, if you're married, your spouse. So really, you can just kind of get the whole family tree going from that. They'll have your address and your past addresses. Like when I first saw the data broker had the house that I grew up in, a house that a residence I had briefly in college, rarely for 2 years, every different apartment I've had as an adult.
Wow.
So they'll have past addresses, phone numbers, work phone number, an office desk number that I had for 2 years back in the 2000s. I saw data brokers had that sort of information on me, and email addresses. And if you own property, there's ones that have property records that you own this property. Here's the value of the property. So it goes pretty deep. And then there's other data broker websites that'll, like in the US, you're voting when you vote. Obviously, who you vote for isn't public, but when you voted, what party you're registered with, that
Where?
information, yeah, where you voted,
Mhm.
right, which state and so forth. They'll use that information as well.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it really almost seems like, that thing that Joe did 6 years ago that he never told anybody about, the online data brokers probably knows.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Joe didn't tell anyone, right? And we're all worried about maybe the
Yeah.
embarrassing video from college.
Yeah.
That's embarrassing, right? But this stuff is your address, where you
Yeah.
live and who you live with, right? Which is quite way more dangerous than perhaps in an embarrassing video from college or something like that.
Yeah, but yeah, let's talk about then the real world implications of this happening because, I can see very real potential dangers of this happening if anybody can buy this data, right? Like even from, like a government military perspective, I'm sure that you can see who was in the military and like where they're living and like what areas they're all in and anybody can buy this information. So it seems kind of crazy that we've allowed this to happen.
Yeah, it really is. And the unfortunate thing in the U.S. is that we don't really have a national privacy law, such as which we do in many other countries. So that's allowed this to proliferate. But honestly, even in let's look at Europe, right, where GDPR is one of the most advanced privacy laws. For folks who may not be familiar, GDPR is really a law that enshrines privacy into the rights of European citizens. It gives you the right to have your data deleted by any company or entity that owns it. But even in Europe, there are data brokers and there is a market for personal data, even with that law in place. So without the law, it just makes the
Yeah.
problem worse. But really, the even with laws, this industry is still existing in Europe.
What about in California?
Yeah, right. California has the CCPA, which is probably alongside Texas, I would say the most strongest law in the U.S. But even with the law, as the data is still proliferating. The data brokers are still in business. Now they have gone after a couple very recently. We heard they went after. I think there was two data brokers they went after who did not register themselves, and they ended up paying a fine. So they're supposed to pay a fine. They're still in business, but the good thing about laws like California, Texas, and a few other states have is that it does give consumers rights to opt out, get their data out of these data broker websites. But I think that's just one piece of it. The industry is still continuing to exist
Right.
despite the laws.
Yeah. And so now as the lines between consumer data and business data blur more and more because there are more and more identity-centric threats out there, what does it look like with online data brokers and fueling attacks for businesses against businesses, I guess.
Yeah, there's been a couple of interesting examples. So there's that group Scatterswine and the Octopus campaign. This was a couple of years ago for folks who may not be familiar. The Octopus campaign went after Okta identity credentials, hence the name, Octopus. And essentially they use mass smishing attacks. I think at the end of that campaign, they compromised nearly 10,000 credentials across over 100 different companies. And so when Okta Security looked into how that group was operating, they found that Scatterswine harvested phone numbers, mobile phone numbers from data brokers. And then they use that connection that, okay, the data broker told you where this person works. And your point about personal and business, right? That phone number might have been a business cell phone, it might have been a personal cell phone, right? And in a BYOD scenario,
Hmm.
if I compromise that personal cell phone number, that's a gateway into a business infrastructure. So the lines are certainly blurred between business and personal for the threat actors. Another example that we a little more recent is the Black Bassa ransomware gang. If you look it up, if folks didn't read about it a few months ago, their Slack logs were leaked. So actually, the ransomware gang got hacked, which was I guess kind of interesting for many people. And in their Slack logs, they found that Black Bassa was using Zoom Info, which is one of the biggest B2B data brokers where you can go to find out org charts and where people work. But they were using Zoom Info to help identify their targets, like, okay, who's working at which companies, who would be a good target for us. And they were they use that information to launch phishing attacks and send fake download links that were very tailored to their targets based on that information from Zoom Info. And then, just recently, very recently, depending on when exactly folks are going to be listening to this podcast, there was that unfortunate assassination of those politicians in Minnesota, and they just found they arrested the person, and they found that that person had a notebook where they noted a few known data broker websites where that person was checking off that I found the speaker's information on this data broker website. So it's not beyond just the cyber aspects of it, the physical security. It poses a threat for people's physical security as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I love to talk about identity-based threats because I think it's so interesting because we're in this phase of like, oh, this is your personal life, your privacy, your control, whatever. But it's really not because the business needs to do something about it to protect themselves because, yeah, you have BYOD, you have all of these ways that they can infiltrate the network. They have their credentials that are being affiliated with, the data broker sites, but also with like compromised credentials. So, so many aspects of this flow in and out of business to personal that is just so fascinating to think about, like the scale at which this is happening as well.
Yeah, and if you actually begin, doing something about it, right? Which we can talk about how Optery helps with that, right? But you can get your data removed from those websites, and if a company helps an individual with that, it's one of those rare situations where it's a win-win where it's good for the company for this to get their employees' data off the websites, right? So that data is not there to drive some of the attacks that we spoke about. Great. But then it's also good for the individual because not having your personal data out there helps you as an individual protect against identity theft, harassment, and doxing. If someone and such. So the line is blurred, but doing something about it is one of those things that helps both the professional and the personal.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I do want to talk about what we're supposed to do about this, but before we get into that, let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit about the AI potential in here and how that's affecting this. So I guess you've been in kind of the industry and understanding data online and privacy for a long time. So when AI gets introduced, right, maybe like three
Mhm.
years ago, whatever, how did that affect this space?
Yeah, it dramatically changed things. It probably makes sense if to step back and think about. So we're, really these data on data broker websites drive social engineering attacks. So let's
Yeah.
unpack how a social engineering attack works. The first step from the threat actor's perspective, the first step is selecting your target, right? So with AI, it dramatically increases their ability to assess that data and decide who to attack, right? So the AI can really find who has the most data out there, and then really create agents to go and harvest that data and more quickly compile lists of targets along with the information that they need to target the person. Without AI, the threat actors had bots and such, but the AI just accelerates their ability to assess the needed data to decide who to target.
Yeah.
All right, once they've decided who to target, right, whatever meets this threat actor's criteria, then the AI can help them craft like really highly believable and hyper personalized messages, right? So AI can go and analyze all anyone's social media posts. They can analyze videos of this person online, any articles written about them, and then really that'll help the threat actor tailor the voice and the tone of their message to make the attack just that much more believable. And then, of course, with the voice enabled AI assistants, that can help create deepfake videos, right? So I can create a deepfake video with a voice that really sounds like Paul and leverages information about Paul that might be out there to make this video sound more believable. I'll reference coworkers that I know this person's on my team and so forth. So AI, just as it does for legitimate business purposes, AI just increases the efficiency, speed, and scale, right? That's why we're using AI for good business purposes. But guess what? That's what it also does for threat actors. It increases their speed, efficiency, and scale of social engineering attacks.
Yeah, for sure. And then I have to imagine that they've got some kind of AI that is self-learning in that it'll be like, oh, great, that one worked. Let's run that again. Let's like tweak this one thing, run that again, until they've got a perfect setup that, has a higher success rate than other attacks that they might have had, like bad phishing attacks that they've previously launched are suddenly becoming a little bit better and have a little higher success rate. So
Yeah, exactly. The same way we tweak any GPTs that we're working on as we get as it gets better at what we're having it do, the threat actors are going to do the same thing with all the tools they're using. Absolutely.
yeah, that's so crazy. And I think like just that part of like the AI driven attacks increase the amount of attacks, increase the amount of alerts that are going into a SOC, and increase the amount of workload and the burnout and the confusion and the alert fatigue and everything that we're all facing. And this is in large because of the amount of data that's out there, how it's being mined, how it's being used, and just putting a lot of pressure on SOC teams. So let's get to the part about what we're supposed to do about this. How do
Yeah,
you fix it?
yeah, and you're right about sort of like that stress and anxiety of being in a SOC or today versus any time, right? But I think the first thing that's needed, and I think in my opinion this is long overdue. It's time for a mindset change. We all think about we need defense against social engineering. And that's not wrong, right? You need to play defense with your infrastructure monitoring, your malware, anti-malware awareness training, right? Those things are important and they shouldn't go away. But the problem with all those things is that they're reactive. They only come into play once a social engineering attack has begun. SOC teams and cybersecurity teams, right, they can actually play offense and disrupt these threat actors. And how do you do that? You reduce the attack surface area. You make it harder for the threat actors to get the data that they need to initiate the social engineering attacks. Proactively removing employee PII from the data broker websites is one of the most effective ways to shrink the attack surface area. And without easy access to this data, when I say easy access, by the way, this isn't, oh, I need to go to the dark web, I need Tor. This is a Google search, right? This is, I just create these AI bots that'll just get this data really quickly. If I remove this data source on these data breaker websites, I make it harder for the threat actors to initiate social engineering attacks. And certainly from what we've seen here at Optery is that the SOCs that are doing this, they see a marked decrease in the number of emails that are quarantined, right? Which is a great way to say like, okay, yeah, we are seeing less social engineering attacks. So play offense, be proactive, and get out of this mindset where you can only defend against this. This is one place in cybersecurity where you can successfully play offense and do something about the problem.
Yeah, I think that's so fascinating that you actually have people who see a real reduction in the amount of phishing attempts and malicious emails that they're receiving because they don't have access to the email then. That makes so much sense.
Yeah. It's a very simple thing too, right?
Yeah, like
Compared
as
to
soon
all
as
the
you turn
others.
off the light switch, it's just done.
Yeah, and it's not as complicated or frankly as expensive as all the other cybersecurity infrastructure. That again, I'm not saying you don't need it. You need that stuff, but this is a one. The bang for the buck here is tremendous.
Yeah. So where I find what I find fascinating about Optree is that part of the business versus personal, right? Like you have both. You have businesses who are trying to remove their employees' data, but you also have people trying to remove their own data. And with those lines blurred, how did you bridge into the business part? How did you discover this need for it? And I guess like, can you tell me a little bit more about what businesses are saying about removing their employees' personal data from the internet?
Yeah, absolutely. It started really with the executive protection use case. So businesses they've been doing this for a while with
Right.
let's remove our executives' information. Why is that? Executives are the public face of the company. So you don't want people who might have a disagreement with the company threatening the executive showing up at their house and so on and so forth. So it was always a use case for that. But I think as the sophistication increased and as we started having more conversations with the CISOs and the cybersecurity teams, this conversation began that hey, like we're like, how can we reduce social engineering? Like we know they're getting this data from online. What can we do? And of course, people think like, oh, let's change our privacy settings on our social networks. Please do that for sure, but get this data off of these data broker websites. And it was just educating people about the problem. So it evolved to all right, we're going to protect from all. Okay, we're going to protect our executives to hey, let's talk about risk. Let's look at our entire employee base and let's look at whose credentials, if compromised, most puts the company at risk. So it's not just executives now; it's finance team members, right? There was that well publicized
Mm.
story about that person in California who sent fake invoices to Facebook and Google and made millions of dollars until he was caught. He's now in jail. But that he was able to social engineer his way into the finance team and send them fake invoices, and the money went into that person's bank account, right? So finance team members, if you're a technology company, engineers who have access to source code, or IT admins who have privileges, HR team members who have access to sensitive data. So it's expanding that scope to say, okay, let's look at which employees, such as the ones I mentioned, whose credentials, if compromised, would pose the most risk to the company, and the company then subsidizes essentially data protection for them. And as I mentioned before, it's a bonus for those employees that they get the personal benefits from it as well. And so we're working with all different types of companies across different verticals to really expand this notion of data protection beyond just executives.
Yeah. So do these businesses then do that without their employees knowing?
No, and that's certainly not how we'd want to do it because
Hmm.
a tool like Optery, essentially what we are is that we're an authorized agent, right? We act on your behalf, and basically to say like we will go find your data and submit opt out requests to these data brokers at scale. So with that, we need your permission. We're not going to do it without someone's permission. So the way we work with our and our business customers is that we'll work with some cybersecurity leader. There's a list of employees they want to cover. They'll get an email invite, sign up for Optery. Your company is protecting you with Optery. Click here. And then they
Mm,
create a profile in our platform just as a consumer would. And then we'll use that information to go
I
find that
see.
information on data broker websites and submit opt out requests on their behalf.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I was like, oh, is this a service that businesses are using every day that I just don't know about, even that they're already doing it for, for me?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. It could totally be automated, right? Because businesses have all this information sitting in an age. We need a person's name and address, and their year of birth. That's it. All we
Yeah.
need. That's sitting in an HRIS system. So you're right. It could happen without you knowing it, but we certainly individuals' rights are important, and we want to respect that. And as I said, we are an authorized agent on behalf of the individual, not the company. So we
Yeah.
need an individual's agreement to do
Yeah.
this on their behalf.
But I mean, like I said, the lines are so blurred, right? So I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know what kind of encryption my company is using. That doesn't pertain to me. Like they're doing it. I know that they're protecting me, keeping us safe, everything, right? I trust them. So like,
yeah,
if they were gonna be like, oh yeah, we already removed your data from the internet, I'd be like, cool, great, thanks.
yeah. It's I the benefit would be there, but I certainly I would
We're
think a
not
lot
there
of
yet.
yeah, and it's
but it
your
could be
data, right?
coming.
So, yeah, or some people, I think that some people just are uncomfortable with that. I was like, well, yeah, the net result of what you did is good, but I might not agree with how you got there
Yeah.
because I own my data as an individual, and we certainly believe in that at Optery. And you
Yeah.
did this on my behalf. Sure, you
Yeah.
did something good, but what's to say that the next thing you do won't be a good thing, right? And then
Yeah.
that might be how a lot of people might think about that sort of
Yeah.
scenario.
Yes, which is why those boundaries between the two are just like so blurred and muddied because it is a
Yeah,
risk to the business, but it's that person's individual data that they control and they can do whatever they want with. So,
yeah.
if I am the kind of person who wants to be chronically online and publish every single thing about me, there's nothing that my company could do theoretically, right?
Yeah, exactly. Unless if you're saying something about the company, I guess
Yeah.
they could do a cease and desist. But you're right. If your personal free speech is your personal free speech.
Yeah. So, just company wise, like from a business standpoint and security standpoint, that's so interesting to try and wrangle everybody's data, keep everybody safe, make sure that, you're reducing your amount of alerts, that you're reducing your phishing attempts and juggling that with people's personal privacy.
Yeah, I mean, what companies can do is be more intelligent about what information they put out there, right? So there might be an executive bio that says, "Oh, Joe lives in this city with his wife and his dog and his kids and likes to go kayaking in this lake." Like that's not some information you want to put out there because that is
Hmm.
exactly how threat actors can craft social engineering. So you just have that person's link, say have their title and whatever quote is in the press release, have the quote there, and you don't put a bio that has that much personal information, right? So there's those are ways companies can help protect the company and the individual, but you're right, the rest of it is as you said, it's your data and your
Yep.
social media accounts and what you say.
Yep. So interesting. Okay. Well, great. I'm going to go to Zoom Info and check out what they've got on me really quick. Thank you so much for coming to the show. If
Yeah.
we want to find you and what you're working on online, where can we look?
Yeah, so you can go to www.optery.com, and if you're interested for your business, there's a for business section of the website, and you can sign up and protect your business without even talking to our sales team. But if you need some help, we're here to help, and you can talk to us. We have very transparent pricing, and certainly as an individual, you can sign up to protect yourself as well. I'm always talking about these sorts of things on LinkedIn and various channels. So linkedin.com/Paul Mander, and you can find me there. But yeah, we're always happy to help people better protect their personal and their personal privacy as well as the privacy and security of their business.
Great. Thank you so much. I'll put all those links in the show notes and we'll see you next time.